Welcome to CRYPTID'S Den. 70% of you watching haven't subscribed yet, so hit that red button to join me in uncovering spine-chilling Bigfoot tales. Today, a dark secret in the woods gave me chills. Ever felt like something was watching you? Drop your city in the comments and smash that like button to show some love. Now let's begin. The thing that watched over her some stories don't begin with a scream, but with a silence too loud to ignore. It happened on an ordinary October morning in 1987, the kind of morning where the frost clings to the porch railings, and the sky carries a stillness that makes the trees seem to listen. She was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a coffee mug, when she realized she could no longer see her daughter. 8-year-old Abigail had been playing near the creek just behind their cabin, as she always did, well within sight of the kitchen window. But in the span of a few minutes, she vanished. No sound, no cry. Just gone, like a candle snuffed in a quiet room. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, the parents had searched until their legs gave out. They lit a fire, not for warmth, but as a beacon, hoping it would guide her home. But the woods gave nothing back. Not that night, not the next. And then, something appeared. Something tall, still, covered in earth-toned hair that shimmered like wet moss. It didn't move closer. It didn't run. It just stood there, watching. This story isn't about monsters. Not really. It's about the kind of fear that doesn't shout but lingers. About the line between wilderness and wonder. And about the possibility that someone was watching over her the whole time. Now, let me tell you what really happened in those woods. It wasn't the scream that haunted her. There hadn't been one. No thrashing through the brush, no splashing in the creek, no sound of footsteps running away, just the quiet clink of a ceramic mug against the sink. And then, absence. A gap in the world where a child used to be. She still remembers the smell of that morning. Damp wood, bread crusts, the kind of early October chill that crept up your sleeves while the sun pretended to warm the grass. Abigail had just finished her oatmeal. She laughed at something, her own joke, probably, and skipped down the back steps to play by the creek like she always did. The mother stayed at the sink longer than usual. Maybe she was daydreaming. Maybe she was tired. Or maybe this is what she punishes herself with most. Maybe she simply trusted too much in the quiet rhythm of their life. No one ever came out that far. No cars, no neighbors. Just them and the trees and the water. They built their lives on that silence. And yet, silence is where it happened. She glanced up just to check. It had only been a few minutes. But the patch of grass where Abigail had crouched, tasting ants tossing leaves, was empty. The sun still filtered through the trees. The creek still whispered over the rocks. Nothing looked out of place. And somehow, that was the most terrifying part of all. The screen door slammed as she ran out barefoot, heart already tripping over itself. "Abby," she called, eyes darting. "Abigail," her voice bounced back at her from the trees. No rustling, no giggle, just that unbearable, awful calm. She reached the creek bed, where little footprints still pressed into the wet mud. So small. So perfect, like someone had painted them just moments before. They led toward the edge of the woods, and then stopped. Just stopped, like the forest had swallowed her whole. A branch cracked to her right and she spun, heart leaping, but it was just a squirrel, just nature doing what it always did. Everything looked the same. Everything sounded the same, but nothing felt the same. By the time her husband came home, the sun was high. And she was shaking. He found her near the edge of the trees, still calling, still waiting, like a woman gone slightly mad. When she told him what happened, he didn't ask questions. He just grabbed the flashlight in his coat and they started walking. No food, no water, just the frantic need to do something. They searched until their legs gave out, voices ragged, eyes raw. That night, they lit a fire behind the cabin, hoping it would guide Abigail home, hoping she could see the glow. But nothing came out of the trees, Not her. Not even a sound. The next day, the father found one of her gloves. Muddy, limp, tucked near the base of a maple tree, as if placed there. Beside it, a few broken twigs, bent in a way that didn't feel natural. But whether it was Abigail or something else, they couldn't be sure. It was on the third night that the mother felt something watching. Not just the dread of absence, but a presence. She'd been staring into the woods, too tired to cry, too scared to sleep. And then she saw it. At first, she thought it was a shadow, some trick of the firelight. But then it shifted slightly, a shape, a form, tall, broad, covered in something dark and matted. It stood perfectly still behind a tree, about 30 or 40 feet from the cabin. Not hiding, not threatening, just there, watching. She didn't scream, couldn't. Her mouth went dry. She reached for her husband's arm, but by the time he turned, the shape had melted into the woods. The next morning, her husband said quietly, "I saw it too." Before dawn, same place. They didn't speak of it again. Not right away, because how do you admit to seeing something you don't even have a name for? But it would not be the last time they saw it. And what they came to believe, what they came to feel, was that the thing in the woods wasn't just watching them. It had been watching her. There was nothing particularly special about the cabin. That's what she always said when asked. It was plain, made of pine and old nails, built by her husband's father when the land was still cheap and untouched. No paint, no phone, no electricity. Just a roof, a stove, and a view of the woods that stretched farther than the eye could follow. But to them, it was everything. It was safety, simplicity, a place where the world didn't interfere. The creek out back was only 20 yards from the rear window of the kitchen. Abigail played there almost every day, gathering smooth rocks, making up little stories about frogs and fairies, talking to herself in that way children do when no one's listening. From where her mother stood at the sink, she could always see her. That was the deal. Never go past the creek, never go where the trees thicken, and always come when called. They didn't worry. Not really. Not really. Not in that place. There were no neighbors for miles, and no roads that went farther than theirs. They were alone, but never lonely. The father worked in the forest as a logger. The mother tended the garden, baked, read old books. They had no television, no radio, just each other and the rhythms of the land. October in the mountains is something else. The leaves burn gold and red before they fall, and the air gets crisp enough to bite. That morning had been no different. Abigail had eaten her oatmeal with cinnamon, asked if she could wear her red gloves, and skipped out the back door with a crust of bread in her hand. The mother watched her go, humming. The girl had always been content with the quiet, that stillness. It used to be their comfort. But now, thinking back, she says it was too quiet that morning. Not just peaceful, not just calm. Dead. She remembers hearing a crow call, then nothing. The wind paused. Even the creek felt like it had slowed to a hush. She didn't notice at first. Not really. She finished the dishes. She tied back her hair. She looked up from the sink, expecting to see that little red coat bouncing by the rocks, and instead saw nothing. The ground was there. The grass. The willow by the bend. But not the girl, not her daughter. She didn't panic right away. She walked to the back door, called out. Maybe Abigail had crouched behind a bush, watching a bug. Maybe she was playing a game. She stepped out onto the porch. The boards creaked under her feet. "Abby!" she called. "Come on now. You stay close." Still nothing. Then she moved faster, down the steps, across the yard, to the creek bed. The damp mud gave under her feet. Her eyes scanned everywhere. "Abigail!" she called louder now, and still no answer. That was when she saw the footprints. Tiny, unmistakable, pressed cleanly into the soft earth, leading away from the creek, into the woods, a clear trail. And then, just a few yards in, the trail ended, vanished, as if the girl had taken flight, or simply stopped existing. She tried not to scream. She told herself not to. But something inside cracked. She turned in circles, heart pounding, calling again and again. The trees swallowed her voice. The woods felt suddenly older, unfamiliar. When her husband got home, she was on her knees near the tree line, sobbing. He didn't ask what happened. He saw it in her eyes. They both ran into the trees that evening, holding flashlights and shouting until their throats burned. They didn't eat. They didn't pack supplies. They just went. By nightfall, they'd covered a radius of a mile. They built a fire, not for warmth, but to signal her. Maybe she was nearby, cold, afraid. Maybe she'd see the light. Maybe she'd come back. She never did. The second day brought no better answers. The father found a glove, red, small, lying near a cluster of broken ferns. A twig snapped oddly, as if bent by something heavy. The mother felt her stomach twist. Was she being led deeper? Or was it just her desperation reading meaning into shadows? They didn't sleep. Not properly. They sat by the fire again that night, staring into the woods. The silence stretched long and taut. The mother whispered her name into the dark, over and over. Abigail. Baby, if you can hear me. Nothing. But here's the part that always stays with her. The part she never told the police. Somewhere past midnight, she swore she heard breathing. Not wind, not an animal. Breathing. Deep, steady, just beyond the trees. She turned slowly, flashlight shaking in her hands. The beam caught nothing. Just branches and fog. But the feeling didn't leave. It settled on her shoulders like weight. Something was out there. And worse. Something knew she was there too. The next day, they called in a favor. The nearest neighbor, almost 12 kilometers away, drove into town and brought back the sheriff. Dogs were brought in. Search parties combed the area. They found nothing new. By nightfall on the third day, the mother sat on the porch steps, hands numb, mind running in loops. And that's when she saw it again. No, not Abigail. Something else. It stood behind a tree, just barely visible in the twilight. Too tall to be a man, covered in what looked like fur, but hanging heavy like wet moss. Its head cocked slightly, as if curious. She didn't move. Neither did it. They stayed like that for what felt like a lifetime. Then it turned quietly and disappeared back into the trees. And the moment it was gone, a single thought settled into her bones like frost. It had been there the whole time. They didn't plan it. There was no map, no gear, no strategy. Just flashlights, half dead from the last hunting season, and a pair of boots each. He grabbed a small hatchet. She stuffed one of Abigail's sweaters in her coat pocket, red and woolen, the kind she used to chew on the sleeve of when she was nervous. They didn't speak much, just nodded, and stepped into the trees as the sun dropped behind the ridge. That first night, the forest felt too big, like it had changed sizes when they weren't looking. The trails he used to know by heart, paths worn by years of dragging lumber and walking game, seemed to twist the wrong way. What should have been a slope was suddenly a hill. What should have been a clearing was filled with brush. But they didn't stop. Not once. They called her name until their voices rasped, sometimes together, sometimes separately, so she might hear one or the other. They shouted into the dark until the wind swallowed their words whole. Their lights danced across trunks and branches, and every now and then they'd catch a glint. Animal eyes, maybe, or just dew on the bark. The woods didn't answer, but they were never truly quiet. Not in the way cities go quiet. The forest has its own hum. Crickets, leaves, the occasional pop of a sapling giving way. But that night, it felt wrong. As if the woods were holding its breath. Hours passed. They returned to the edge of the property and built a fire. She didn't say it, but she thought. If she's out there, maybe she'll see this. Maybe it'll pull her back. He stacked the wood in silence. Neither of them had eaten. Neither noticed the ache in their legs until they sat down. But even then, they didn't rest. Her eyes stayed locked on the tree line. The flames crackled, throwing long shadows that danced like ghosts across the yard. She thought she heard something. Footsteps, maybe. But it was always just wind, just the fire settling. That night, she dreamed of red fabric caught on a tree branch, a voice calling from far off, just out of reach. A hand too large to be human, lifting something gently from the ground. In the morning, they split up. Not far, just enough to cover more ground. He went northeast, toward the old ridge. She stayed by the creek, pacing its banks, calling softly, holding Abigail's sweater like it was some kind of charm. She saw deer tracks, broken bark, a tuft of fur, but no sign of a little girl, no sock, no hair ribbon, no note in the mud. It was like Abigail had never existed. But then he called out, voice sharp, and she ran. He stood in a shallow gully near a fallen pine, his face pale, his hand shaking. At his feet was one small red glove, caked in mud. Damp, but intact. The right hand. She collapsed beside it, pressed it to her chest. It was hers. No doubt. Abigail always lost the left first. Beside the glove, a branch had been snapped in half. Not broken by weight, but twisted, like something had grabbed it. Bark torn, sap bleeding slowly. She reached out, touched the branch, and that's when she felt it. Something was watching, not from a direction she could pinpoint, not from a shape she could see. But it was there, just beyond in the thicket, waiting. They looked around. Nothing moved. No animal sounds. Even the wind had stilled. The woods had gone back to holding its breath. They took the glove, left the branch. That night, the fire burned longer. He fed it even as the coals piled up. She sat closer to the edge of the porch, scanning, waiting. She didn't expect anything. A part of her. Some primitive sliver she couldn't name. Hoped. Then came the sound. It was soft at first, almost rhythmic. Not quite footsteps, not quite breathing. Just a presence, a pulse in the dark. She froze. The flashlight in her lap rolled off, thudding gently on the floorboards. She didn't pick it up. Didn't dare. Out past the clearing, half lit by the glow, something stood, not moving. Not threatening, just there. A figure, tall, broad, covered in hair or fur or something like moss in moonlight. It stood with one arm against a tree, leaning slightly. The face, she couldn't see. Just the shape. The idea of eyes, watching. She wanted to scream. She didn't. Her body locked up, breath shallow. She felt her heart in her teeth. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch. And then it stepped back. One long, slow movement into the trees. Not a retreat, not a panic. Just leaving. She blinked. Gone. She turned to him, but he was already staring out the same direction, jaw clenched. I saw it last night, he said. Didn't tell you. She didn't ask why. She knew. Some things sound crazier when spoken out loud. But I should have said something, she thought, because if we'd followed it then, that was the moment everything shifted. Not when Abigail disappeared, not when they found the glove, but when they realized they weren't alone in the search. Something else was looking too. 3 days in, their bodies had started to slow, but their nerves were sharpening. Food had turned into an afterthought. Sleep became a suggestion rather than a need. They moved by instinct now, by memory and desperation. The search crews had come and gone. Boots on the ground, dogs barking, radios hissing. But none of them had found what mattered. None of them had felt what she felt. The thing in the trees, the watcher. She hadn't said anything to the sheriff. Not about the figure, not about the eyes. You learn quickly that grief sounds more believable than madness. But the fire told her the truth. Each night, when the flames licked at the air and the wood cracked in the cold, she sat facing the woods with that old flashlight across her knees. And each night, the feeling returned. A sensation like breath on the back of the neck. A presence just past the edge of vision. Then, on the fourth night, it came back. It stood again in that familiar place, behind the same broad pine, framed by darkness and moonlight, taller than any man she'd known, broader in the shoulders, with limbs too long to be comforting. It didn't move. It didn't speak. It only watched. Not like something hunting. Not like something hunting. More like something waiting. She reached for her husband's hand, fingers trembling. He was already watching. He didn't speak either. Together, they held their breath and their silence. Then it stepped back into the trees, slow and sure, and disappeared. In the morning, her husband confessed he'd seen it earlier too. Not last night. That morning, just before dawn. Same place, same stillness. He'd been chopping kindling behind the cabin when the feeling came over him. Not fear. He was used to the woods and what they offered, but something colder. He looked up and saw it standing halfway behind the trunk. Its eyes weren't glowing. Its face wasn't snarling, but the weight of its gaze dropped on him like a stone. And then, as if it understood it had been seen, it backed away. That was the second time. But what he didn't tell her until days later, what stayed in his mouth like a stone, was what happened after the third time. It was nearing dusk. The light turned amber, the kind that stretches every shadow long and thin. He'd gone to the shed to fetch a rope when he felt that same pressure in the air, like a storm building where no cloud should be. He turned. There it was. Closer this time. Standing not 30 feet away in the open. It didn't move, didn't hide, just stood with its head slightly cocked, one arm down by its side, the other across its chest. Its fur was damp, hanging like moss from its arms. Mud clung to its legs. Its face was partly obscured by hair. But what struck him most, what shook him in a way no bear or cat ever had, were its eyes. Not animal, not wild, just still, calm, measuring. And then, slowly, it raised one hand. Not in warning, not in threat, just lifted that massive arm, long fingers extended and pointed, to the west. Then it lowered its arm, took a single step backward, and vanished behind a wall of pine. He told her later, when the fire had burned low and their hope was turning brittle, it pointed, west, like it wanted me to go. She didn't laugh, didn't dismiss it. Instead, she whispered, "It's showing us something." They didn't sleep that night. They laid out what little they needed, water, matches, the flashlight, and planned to head west at first light. No dogs, no deputies, no maps, just a direction. And a strange kind of trust, because here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Sometimes, the thing you're afraid of is the only one trying to help you. They didn't speak much that morning. The fire had burned low, nothing but ember bones and curls of ash. He packed a satchel with water, a compass they hadn't touched in years, and a flashlight they no longer trusted. She folded Abigail's sweater and tucked it inside her coat again. The air was brittle. Frost clung to the edges of the windows. The trees outside stood too still. They left just after sunrise, walking west, toward where the thing had pointed. At first, the woods looked familiar. Well-worn trails, bark-scratched trunks, the rise and fall of land they'd walked 100 times. But the farther they went, the less the forest felt like theirs. Pines grew denser. Light struggled through the canopy. And the silence, that awful listening silence, wrapped itself tighter around them. They didn't talk. Words felt too loud. She counted her steps. He marked bends in the trail. They moved like people hunting something they couldn't describe, driven by a direction that made no logical sense, except it had come from that thing, and somehow they believed it. Hours passed. The sun climbed, though its light barely warmed the forest floor. Their legs ached, and the air turned damp. Every sound, no matter how small, the snap of a twig, the crunch of leaf underfoot, made her heart jump. Her ears strained for anything, crying, a name, a whisper. Nothing, until midday. They stopped near a dry creek bed. It ran shallow and cracked, lined with dark stones and tangled roots. She bent down, wiped sweat from her brow, and for a moment thought she heard something. Faint, thin, like breath through broken glass. Did you hear? Then again, louder this time. A voice, small, weak. Mommy, she froze. Weak, Mommy, she froze. He turned, eyes wide. Say that again. I heard her. Where? I don't know. Then again, Mommy, they ran. He tripped over roots, caught himself with his hands. She tore through brush, branches slicing at her arms. The sound came again, closer now, behind a fallen log. She dropped to her knees, heart in her throat. And there she was, Abigail, sitting beneath a thicket of brambles, barefoot, skin scratched, lips cracked, eyes wide, but alive. The world stopped. For a second, nothing moved, nothing breathed. Then she surged forward, scooped her daughter into her arms, sobbing, shaking, kissing every inch of her face. Abigail whimpered softly. Her arms were too weak to hug back. He reached them, dropped beside them, pulled both into his chest. They cried together, a heap of dirt and tears and disbelief. She was alive. But then Abigail whispered something, a sentence that made the mother's breath catch. Mommy, it watched me sleep. The words were quiet, not afraid, just honest. She pulled back, brushed her daughter's hair away from her face. What watched you, baby? Abigail blinked. The big one, it was careful. The mother looked at her husband. His eyes said everything hers couldn't. Abigail wasn't talking nonsense. She was telling the truth. They wrapped her in the sweater, gave her sips of water, carried her back the way they came. She barely spoke the rest of the way, just rested her head against her father's chest and hummed a tune only she seemed to know. But every time the wind rustled the trees, she looked toward it. Not afraid, but almost thoughtful. And that night, back at the cabin, after they'd washed her wounds and put her in bed, the mother stood alone at the back window. The woods were still again, but not empty. She knew it had led them. She knew it had led them. She knew the thing in the forest had pointed not just to where Abigail was, but to why she was still alive. And she knew. The forest had given her back. But what had it taken in return? And I didn't speak of miracles, not even after finding. The word felt too clean, too soft, too Sunday morning. What happened wasn't wrapped in light or washed in warmth. It was raw. It was dirt under fingernails, blood crusted at the hairline, hands trembling as they held something once lost. But it was a return. A quiet resurrection pulled from beneath the weight of the forest. That morning, the air had been damp, as if the trees themselves were sweating. They followed the direction it had pointed, deeper into the western grove, past the dry creek bed, over roots that clawed at their ankles. Time slipped oddly there. Minutes stretched, hours looped. They moved more by feeling than sense. And then the voice had cracked through the hush. Mommy. It wasn't loud, not even panicked, just There. A single word dropped into the stillness, and everything snapped toward it like a compass to true north. They found her beneath a tangle of bramble, sitting on the ground, head tucked to her chest, her small fingers knotted into the hem of her dress. Her bare feet were cracked, her skin ghost pale, but she was breathing. Back at the cabin, she lay between two quilts while her mother spooned water to her lips. Her father hovered at the door, unsure whether to watch or turn away. Abigail slept most of the day, her body curled like something newly born. But just after sunset, she stirred. "Do you remember anything?" the mother asked gently. The girl blinked up at her. "I was cold," she whispered. "The first night." She didn't cry as she spoke. She didn't pause, came out like a child remembering a strange dream. Confused, but vivid. She'd followed a squirrel. That's how it started. It had darted across the creek, and she had chased it, giggling, not knowing how far she'd gone until the world changed behind her. The trees grew taller. The air felt heavy. When she tried to turn back, nothing looked the same. The sun fell, and she curled beneath a tree, knees tucked to her chest. She'd cried quietly, not for help, just out of confusion. She'd fallen asleep like that. The next night, she said, it came. "At first, I thought it was a bear," she murmured, "but it didn't sound like one. It was slower." Her mother's breath caught. "It didn't come close. Just sat across from me. I could see its eyes. They went scary. What did it do? It just watched. Then, in the morning, there were berries, and a leaf with water in it." She described how, each day, she'd wake to find small things beside her. Bits of moss arranged like bedding, fruit, water caught in curled leaves. Once, even a strip of bark that could have come from the same tree where she'd lost her glove. "It made this sound," Abigail said, "kind of like a hum. Low, like it was trying to calm me." She told them it never spoke, never tried to touch her, but it never left either. Every night I could feel it there. I think it was keeping me safe. Then she paused. Her voice fell almost to a whisper. "I got scared once. I cried loud, and it swayed back and forth, like how you do when you hold me." The room went still. Her father sat down slowly, hands curled around his knees. He didn't say anything, just listened. Abigail laid back down, staring at the ceiling. "Was it real?" she asked. Her mother couldn't answer. Later that night, after Abigail fell asleep again, the parents sat by the fireplace. Neither had touched their dinner. The fire popped, low and sullen. Outside, the wind rattled the trees in small, secretive bursts. "I think it helped her," the mother said quietly. "It didn't keep her. It watched over her." He didn't argue. He just nodded. Then, after a long silence, she added something she hadn't told him yet. "The night before we found her, I heard it, breathing, from just beyond the window." He looked at her. "It was standing there watching the cabin." She paused. "And I didn't feel fear." He leaned back in his chair, staring into the fire. "You think it knew we'd listen? That would follow?" "I think," she said, "it wanted us to." But even then, she didn't tell him what Abigail had said just before drifting back to sleep. Too soft to trust, too strange to repeat. She said, "I hope it's okay out there." I didn't get to say thank you. And that was the moment something shifted in her again. Not fear, not relief, but reverence. In the weeks that followed, they didn't talk much to anyone. People came by, curious, concerned, offering casseroles and questions. But the family kept their answers short. "She got lost. We were lucky. She's resting now." But none of it felt true. Not really. Because the real answer wasn't one you could hand out on a porch. The real answer lived in shadows and instinct and silence. The kind of silence that hums with the memory of something larger than you. Abigail healed slowly. Her scratches closed. The color came back to her cheeks. But she was quieter now, thoughtful in a way that seemed older than her 8 years. She didn't cry. She didn't cry. She sat on the back steps sometimes, just looking out toward the woods. One evening, the mother sat with her, arms wrapped around her knees, blanket shared between them. The air was still. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called once and then was quiet. Abigail spoke first. "It wasn't scary," she said. "Not after the first night." Her mother turned to her. "It made the dark not so dark," she asked again, gently, about what happened. And this time, Abigail told her more. She'd been following a squirrel. Yes, but it wasn't just play. She remembered hearing something before she chased it. A low hum, like a bass note held in the air. And she thought someone was calling her, not with words, with something else, something warm. That's when she saw it, the first time, standing beyond the trees, not close, just present. "I didn't run," she said. "I thought it might need help." That's the part that never left her mother's mind. The inversion, the idea that it was the one in trouble, that her child, lost, cold, alone, still looked at that towering thing and saw need, not danger. The second night, it came back, sat across from her again, always just far enough. When she cried, it would sway slightly, left to right, a slow rhythm that reminded her of being rocked to sleep. It had eyes like wet wood, she said, and they didn't blink much. It never growled, never showed teeth. She said its breath smelled like wet leaves and old stone. Sometimes at dawn, it would already be gone. But there'd be things waiting. Food, water, soft piles of moss. Once, even a small feather pressed into the dirt. Then came the moment her voice went softer. I think it talked to me. Not with words. How? It made a sound, like a thump. In my chest, I felt it instead of hearing it. Her mother nodded slowly. She didn't understand, but she didn't disbelieve Eve either. Later that night, she told her husband everything. They sat on the floor by the wood stove, the house dim, the logs popping low. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he said, "It watched her like we would have. Not like prey, like she was. Theirs." She didn't answer, because he wasn't wrong. And yet, that wasn't quite it either. Not theirs. Something else. Then he added, "I don't think it wanted her to leave." She looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" He stared into the flames. Whatever it was, it protected her, cared for her. But maybe it was alone. Maybe she was the first thing it ever had that didn't run. A beat of silence. "Do you think it misses her?" That question hovered in the air like smoke. Neither of them had an answer. But that night, as they climbed into bed, the mother peeked out the window one last time. The woods were dark, still, and for the first time, she didn't wonder if something was out there. She hoped it was. Fall gave way to frost, and with it came a quiet, new rhythm. Abigail didn't talk about the thing in the woods unless she was asked. And even then, her answers came slow, like a secret she was still deciding how much to share. One evening, she stood at the edge of the trees, holding a piece of cornbread in both hands, and asked, "Can I leave this for it?" They didn't question her, not out loud. So they placed the food on a flat rock near the tree line, a quiet offering, cornbread, berries, sometimes a slice of apple pie, and left it overnight. Sometimes it disappeared. Sometimes it didn't. But every so often, something was left in return. Once it was a small, round stone, too smooth to have come from the forest floor. Another time, a spiral of woven grass, tight as a bird's nest. One morning, they found 3 feathers pressed into the dirt in the exact shape of a triangle. It never felt like coincidence. The father stopped hunting. The rifle he used to clean with ritual precision stayed locked in its cabinet. He sold it to a neighbor before the snow hit. He took to walking the woods instead, unarmed, slower than he used to, as if listening for something. He said he no longer felt like the forest was his to take from. They didn't try to track the creature, didn't search for footprints or set up cameras. The mother said it felt wrong. Like chasing down someone who'd once saved your life just to prove they existed. They let it be. Let it return if it wanted. Each October, Abigail asked to visit. She never stayed long. Just enough to walk to the edge of the trees, place a piece of bread or fruit down, and whisper a soft thank you into the cold wind. The mother once caught her standing there, lips moving, eyes wide and glassy. "What are you saying?" she asked. Abigail answered, "I just wanted to know I'm okay." There were moments, fleeting and strange, when the mother thought she saw movement just past the pines. A shift of shadow, a flick of something massive slipping through the brush. But it never came close again. Never showed itself. Howard, the old man who lived farther out than anyone, came by that winter with firewood and questions. When he finally heard the story, stripped down, half-whispered, soft as a prayer, he nodded and said, "My grandfather used to talk about something like that. Called it Giluk. Said it wasn't beast. Wasn't man. But it knew things." The mother asked if his grandfather had ever seen it. Howard shook his head. But he left it things. And sometimes it left things back. One day Abigail stood in the kitchen, brushing her fingers along the windowsill, and said, "Do you think it ever had a name?" The mother didn't answer. She didn't know how. But she thought of the way it had stood so still, the way it pointed, the way it had kept her daughter alive without asking for anything in return. Not a monster, not a ghost, just something ancient, something watching. And somewhere out there, past the trees, past the reach of flashlights and boots, she hoped it still listened. Because she knew now what few people ever do. Not everything that lives in the dark wants to hurt you. Some things just want to be remembered. Years have passed now. The cabin still stands. The creek still runs. The woods still breathe their ancient rhythm. But nothing has ever quite been the same. Abigail grew up, as children do. She moved away, took a job in the city, got used to the noise, the glow of streetlights, the hum of a life lived close to others. But every October, without fail, she returns. She doesn't stay long, just enough to walk to the edge of the woods, lay something small at the base of the trees, and whisper something into the wind. No one hears it, not really. But her mother watches her lips, watches the way her fingers brush the earth. It's not a ritual. It's not superstition. It's gratitude. And maybe, just maybe, it's love. The father still walks the woods sometimes, but he does it slowly now. He's older. He doesn't call out like he used to. Just listens to the way the forest moves around him. And sometimes, when he's alone, he pauses at the place where they found her. He closes his eyes, and he waits. Not for answers, just for presence. Because they know now that not everything in the dark is meant to frighten us. Some things come quietly. Some things step back into shadow because that's where they belong. Not because they are monsters, but because they understand us more than we understand ourselves. Howard passed away last winter, left behind a box of old books, some hand-carved whistles, and a folded piece of paper with one sentence written in pencil. Some watchers are only waiting to be seen. No one ever came forward. No one ever found evidence of what had been there. The sheriff marked Abigail's file closed with "found safe." But the truth lives off paper, doesn't it? It lives in breath, in dreams, in the way a forest hushes when something bigger than us steps between the trees. The mother, now older, her hands softer, her voice steadier, tells the story only when she knows it's needed. Not for attention, not for drama, but because sometimes the right person needs to hear it, needs to know they weren't crazy, needs to know that the eyes they felt weren't just fear. And if you ever find yourself out in the woods, deep enough that the trees close in, and the wind stops, and something shifts just out of sight, don't run. Stand still. Breathe deep, because maybe, just maybe, you're not alone. And maybe you're being watched, not by a monster, not by a man, but by something older, wiser, waiting. And whatever it is, it might just be the reason you make it back, or why someone else did. There are stories we tell because they explain something. A place, a sound, a fear that won't sleep in the dark. But then there are the stories we tell not to explain, but to remember, to mark the shape of something we can't quite name, but know in our bones is real. This is one of those stories. It doesn't end with a clean answer, or a clear face in the light. There's no footprint in a cast, no photograph to hang on the wall. But some truths don't live in evidence. They live in silence, in instinct. In the soft places behind your ribs where memory settles long after reason has left the room. We live in a world that rewards certainty, science, proof, resolution. But the earth beneath our feet is older than all our machines. The woods, the wind, the hills. They've been here longer than names, and longer still than understanding. And if you've ever stood alone beneath a canopy of trees, heard the hush that falls when you step off the trail, then maybe you felt it too. That weight, that watchfulness, that awareness is not always something to fear. Sometimes it's a reminder that we are not the only ones who endure, that there are things in this world, beings, forces, maybe even spirits, that dwell alongside us, not above or below, but beside, quiet, patient, older than our oldest stories, not monsters, not myths, but witnesses. And maybe protectors. This isn't a tale about good and evil. It's about the spaces in between, about how the wild does not owe us comfort, yet sometimes offers it anyway, about how the unknown isn't always cruel, and how sometimes the thing we fear most in the dark is simply trying to keep us from becoming lost. We forget, in our cities and screens, what it means to be small, to not be in control. But the wilderness remembers. And sometimes, if we're lucky, it reminds us in ways that change us forever. So when you find yourself out there, alone, uncertain, pause before fear takes over. Listen, not just with your ears, but with something deeper. Because what feels like fear might be reverence. What feels like being watched might just be being seen. Somewhere, right now, someone is walking through those same woods. And maybe, just maybe, they're not alone either. Maybe something moves just out of sight. Not to harm, not to haunt, but to witness, to wait. And if you ever find yourself lucky enough to return from a place that should have swallowed you whole, look back once more before you leave. Say, thank you. Leave something behind. And understand, not every story is meant to end. Some are meant to echo. Thank you for listening. If this story moved something in you, if it stirred a memory or sparked a question, don't let it fade. Leave a comment. Share what you believe might be out there. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real stories whispered through generations, heavy with mystery and memory, subscribe, follow, and stay close. Because the woods are full of stories, and some of them are still watching.